I still remember the exact moment my father-in-law's face turned red with rage. Standing in the doorway of his mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, he pointed at me like I was garbage and said, "Get out of my property, you worthless failure. My daughter deserves better than a 35-year-old loser who can't even provide." His wife, Margaret, stood behind him with that same disgusted look, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. What they didn't know was that in my backpack, I was carrying documents that would make me a multimillionaire within 3 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is David Chen. I'm 38 years old now. But this story starts when I was 32, freshly married to the love of my life, Rebecca. Rebecca came from old money. Her parents, Richard and Margaret Thornton, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the East Coast. They had everything: the mansion, the country club membership, the vacation home in the Hamptons. And then there was me, the guy who grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, raised by a single mom who worked double shifts at a diner. When Rebecca and I met at a logistics conference in Boston, it was instant chemistry. She was working in her father's corporate office, handling marketing. I was there representing the small freight brokerage where I worked, making $62,000 a year. Not impressive by her family's standards, but I was good at my job. Really good. I could look at a supply chain and see inefficiencies that others missed. It was like solving puzzles, and I was obsessed. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Richard made it clear from day one that he didn't approve. My daughter could have married a doctor, a lawyer, someone with a future, he told me at our engagement party, loud enough for others to hear. Margaret was more passive-aggressive, always asking when I'd get a real career or move up to management. But Rebecca loved me, and that was enough. Or so I thought. The first 3 years of our marriage were tough. We lived in a modest apartment in Stamford because I refused to take money from her parents. Rebecca worked at her father's company, and I kept grinding at the freight brokerage. But here's what nobody knew. I was building something in secret. Every night after work, from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., I was developing a logistics software platform. I called it Freight Flow. See, I'd noticed a massive gap in the industry. Small and medium-sized trucking companies were getting crushed by inefficiency. They'd drive empty trucks on return routes, losing thousands in potential revenue. Big corporations had software to optimize this, but it cost millions. I wanted to create an affordable AI-powered platform that could match available trucks with shipments in real time, maximizing efficiency for smaller operators. I taught myself coding through YouTube tutorials and online courses. I spent every spare dollar on development. Rebecca knew I was working on a project, but I never told her the full scope. I was terrified of failing and proving her parents right. By the time I turned 35, I had a working prototype. I'd even secured 3 small trucking companies as beta testers, and the results were incredible. They were increasing their revenue by 23% on average. I was so close to launching officially. I just needed a few more months to refine the platform and raise some seed funding. I'd already had preliminary conversations with 2 venture capital firms who were interested. But then everything fell apart. Richard called a family dinner at his mansion in September 2021. It was supposed to be a celebration of Rebecca's birthday. The dining room was exactly what you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers, a table that sat 16 people, oil paintings of ancestors on the walls. Margaret had prepared this elaborate meal with their private chef. But halfway through dinner, Richard cleared his throat and made an announcement that changed everything. "Rebecca, your mother and I have been talking. We've decided it's time for you to take a more serious role in the family business. We're making you VP of Operations with a salary of $185,000 a year." Rebecca's eyes lit up. She looked at me excited, waiting for me to share in her joy. I smiled and congratulated her because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But Richard wasn't finished. "However," he continued, staring directly at me, "this position requires dedication and focus. It requires being around people who are equally ambitious and successful." The room got quiet. Margaret set down her wine glass. "David, you've been married to our daughter for 3 years now. You're still working at the same mid-level position, making the same mediocre salary. You have no prospects, no ambition, no future. You're 35 years old, for God's sake. When are you going to become a man and actually provide for your wife?" I felt my face burning. "Mr. Thornton, I'm actually working on something that—" "Something?" he interrupted, laughing. "Let me guess. Another one of your little hobby projects? Rebecca has told us about your late-night computer games, or whatever you're doing instead of focusing on a real career." I looked at Rebecca, hoping she'd defend me, explain that it wasn't a hobby, that I was building something real, but she just looked down at her plate. That's when I realized she'd never actually believed in me either. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room," Margaret chimed in. "David, you're holding our daughter back. She could be socializing with successful people, building real connections, maybe meeting someone more suitable. Instead, she's stuck playing house with you in some cramped apartment." "Mom, that's not fair," Rebecca started, but her father cut her off. "Isn't it? Sweetheart, you're 33 years old. Your friends are married to hedge fund managers, surgeons, tech executives, and you're with a freight broker who plays on his computer at night. Don't you want more for yourself?" I watched my wife's face as her father spoke. Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, but I saw it. Doubt, shame, maybe even agreement. That night, driving home, Rebecca was quiet. When we got to our apartment, she finally spoke. "David, maybe my parents have a point. We've been married 3 years and nothing has really changed. You're still at the same job. We're still in this apartment. I'm 33, and I want to start thinking about kids, a real home, stability. Can you actually give me that?" I tried to explain about freight flow, about the VCs, about how close I was. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. To her, I was just making excuses, dreaming instead of doing. Over the next 2 weeks, things got worse. Rebecca started spending more time at her parents' house. She'd come home late, distant, cold. Then one Friday evening, she sat me down and said the words I'll never forget. "I think we need some space. I'm going to stay with my parents for a while." Space turned into separation. Separation turned into divorce papers. Her lawyer was aggressive, but I didn't fight it. I was too heartbroken, too exhausted. By November 2021, our marriage was over. But here's where things got really ugly. Richard called me 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. "I need you to come to the house. There are some of Rebecca's things you need to pick up." When I arrived, both Richard and Margaret were waiting in the driveway. No Rebecca in sight. Richard handed me a box of my belongings, stuff I'd left at their house over the years. Then he stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "I want you to understand something, David. You were never good enough for my daughter. You were a charity case, a mistake she made because she was young and naive. But she's woken up now. She's already seeing someone new, a man who actually has something to offer. A partner at a law firm. That's the caliber of man she deserves." Margaret laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You should see him, David. He drives a Porsche and has a house in Martha's Vineyard. He's what a real man looks like. I felt something break inside me. Not heartbreak anymore, but something else. Determination. Rage. Clarity. Richard moved even closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. If you ever try to contact Rebecca again, if you ever come back to this property, I will destroy what's left of your pathetic little life. Do you understand me? You're a loser, David. A 35-year-old failure, and I want you to carry that knowledge with you every single day. Then he physically pushed me, not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to make me stumble backward. Now get out of my property. I drove away from that mansion, with tears of humiliation streaming down my face. But somewhere between Greenwich and my apartment, those tears stopped. By the time I parked my car, I'd made a decision. I was going to prove every single one of them wrong. Not for revenge, not to win Rebecca back, but because I knew what I was capable of, even if nobody else did. That night, I sent emails to both VC firms I'd been talking to. Within a week, I had meetings scheduled. Within a month, I had a term sheet for $2.3 million in seed funding. The VCs saw what I saw, a platform that could revolutionize logistics for an underserved market. By January 2022, Freight Flow officially launched. The first year was brutal. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I lived in a studio apartment in Newark, eating ramen and cereal to conserve money. Every dollar went back into the business. I hired 2 developers, a sales guy, and a customer service rep. We operated out of a tiny office space that smelled like mold and had heat that barely worked. But the platform worked. Small trucking companies started signing up. Our AI was matching loads with incredible accuracy, reducing empty miles by an average of 31%. Revenue started growing. Month over month, we were hitting our targets, then exceeding them. By month 8, we had 247 companies using Freight Flow. By month 12, we had 891. In January 2023, a major regional trucking association invited me to speak at their conference in Philadelphia. I demonstrated the platform live, showing how a trucker in Ohio could instantly find a shipment in Pennsylvania instead of driving home empty. The room erupted in applause. After my presentation, I was swarmed by company owners wanting to sign up. That's when the growth exploded. By June 2023, we had over 3,000 companies on the platform. Monthly recurring revenue hit $847,000. The VCs came back, this time with a Series A offer, $18 million at a $65 million valuation. I took it. We hired aggressively, scaled the technology, expanded into new markets. By September 2024, exactly 3 years after that horrible dinner at Richard's mansion, Freight Flow had 8,200 active users, annual revenue of $14.2 million, and a valuation of $78 million. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I bought a beautiful office building in Stamford, the town where Rebecca and I used to live in that modest apartment. I hired 47 employees. I drove a Tesla Model S. I'd made it, but I never forgot what Richard said to me that day. Loser. 35-year-old failure. Those words lived in my head, fueling every decision, every late night, every risk I took. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in October 2024, my receptionist called me with a strange message. Mr. Chen, there's a couple here who say they need to speak with you urgently. They don't have an appointment. Their names are Richard and Margaret Thornton. My heart stopped. I hadn't heard those names in 3 years. Send them to conference room B. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I needed those 10 minutes to compose myself, to figure out what I was going to say, to process the fact that they were here, in my building. When I walked into the conference room, I barely recognized them. Richard, who'd always looked like he stepped out of a country club catalog, looked diminished. His suit was nice but outdated. His face was drawn, tired, older. Margaret sat next to him, her hands folded nervously on the table. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something that looked like desperation. "David," Richard started, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Thank you for seeing us. We weren't sure you would." I sat down across from them, saying nothing. Let them squirm. Margaret spoke next, her voice shaky. "We heard about your company. We saw the article in the Connecticut Business Journal about you being one of the fastest-growing tech CEOs in the state. David, we had no idea you'd accomplished so much. It's truly remarkable." Still, I said nothing. Richard cleared his throat. "David, I'm going to be honest with you because we don't have time for pride anymore. Our business, the dealerships, they're gone. We lost everything." He explained how the luxury car market had collapsed in their region, how they'd over-leveraged during the pandemic, how bad investments and poor management had destroyed what took his family 3 generations to build. They'd filed for bankruptcy in August. The mansion was foreclosed. Their savings were depleted. They were living in a rental apartment in Norwalk. "We're not here to ask for money," Margaret said quickly, though I could see the desperation in her eyes. "We're here because, well, Richard has 30 years of business management experience. I have a background in operations and customer service. We know we don't deserve your consideration after how we treated you. But David, we're desperate. We need work. We need jobs." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who called me a worthless failure was sitting in my conference room, in my building, asking me for a job. I could have savored the moment. I could have thrown his words back at him. I could have made them beg. Instead, I asked a simple question. "Where's Rebecca?" Richard looked down. "She divorced the lawyer about a year ago. Turns out he wasn't who he presented himself to be. She's living in Boston now, working in marketing for a startup. We don't talk much anymore. She took the business failure hard, blamed us for a lot of things." There was sadness in his voice, genuine regret. I leaned back in my chair, processing everything. These people had humiliated me, mocked my dreams, laughed as they destroyed my marriage. And now they sat before me, broken, asking for mercy. The old David would have sent them away. But I'd learned something in those 3 brutal years of building freight flow. Success isn't about revenge. It's about becoming the person you were meant to be, regardless of who doubted you. "I actually do need someone with your experience," I said finally. "We're expanding our enterprise sales division, and we need someone who understands high-level client relationships. Richard, that could be you. Margaret, our customer success team is growing. Your operations background could be valuable there." Their faces transformed with hope and disbelief. "However," I continued, "I need to be clear about something. If you work here, you work for me. You report to department heads who report to me. You don't get special treatment. You don't get executive titles. You start at the bottom, prove yourselves, and maybe you work your way up. The starting salary for the positions I'm describing is $68,000 annually. That's what I'm offering." Richard's face went pale. That was probably less than he spent on wine in a year back when he had money, but reality had humbled him. "David, that's more than fair. We'll take it, and we'll work harder than anyone here. I promise you that." Margaret nodded vigorously, tears forming in her eyes. I pulled out 2 employment contracts I'd had my HR director prepare during those 10 minutes before the meeting. Yes, I'd known what I was going to do before I walked in. Because despite everything, I'm not them. I don't kick people when they're down. I don't mock people's struggles. I lift people up, even people who tried to destroy me. Sign these and you start Monday, 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. As they signed the papers with shaking hands, Richard looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before: respect. "David, I need to say something. That day I kicked you out. The things I said to you. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. You weren't a failure. You were a man with a vision, working towards something real while we were too blind and arrogant to see it. I destroyed my daughter's marriage to a good man because of my own prejudice and stupidity. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm truly, deeply sorry." Margaret was crying now. "We were terrible to you. You deserved so much better. Thank you for giving us this chance. We won't let you down." I stood up, and they stood with me. "I'm not doing this because I forgive you," I said honestly. "I'm doing this because I believe people deserve second chances, and because I need good employees. Prove to me that you can be those employees. Show me the work ethic you should have recognized in me 3 years ago. Do that, and we'll be fine." As they left my office, walking through the modern space with glass walls and motivational quotes and busy employees, I saw Richard pause to look at the wall where we display our company timeline. There was a photo of me from the early days, working on a laptop in that moldy office, unshaven and exhausted, but determined. Next to it was a photo from last month, me ringing the opening bell at a logistics conference, smiling, successful, free. Richard stared at that progression for a long moment. Then he turned to me and said, "You did what I never could. You built something from nothing. You earned every bit of this." Then he walked out. I went back to my office and sat down at my desk. My assistant brought me coffee. Outside my window, I could see the Stamford skyline, the town where I'd once struggled, where Rebecca and I had fought about money and future and dreams. I'd returned as a different person, not bitter, not broken, but proven. 3 weeks later, I got an unexpected email. It was from Rebecca. She'd heard from her parents that they were working for me. She congratulated me on my success and apologized for not believing in me. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been shallow and weak, influenced too much by her parents' values. She wondered if we could maybe talk sometime, catch up, see how we're both doing. I read the email twice, then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. That chapter was closed. She'd made her choice when I needed her most, and I'd made mine by choosing to prove my worth without her. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way.
Today, Freight Flow is on track to hit $23 million in revenue this year. We're expanding into Canada and exploring European markets. Richard and Margaret are still here, working hard, humble, grateful. They've actually become solid employees. Richard has brought in several major clients using his old connections. Margaret runs our customer success team with impressive efficiency. We're not friends, and we never will be. But we're colleagues, and there's a mutual respect now that didn't exist before. Last month, Richard asked if he could speak with me privately. We sat in the same conference room where they'd begged for jobs. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that I tell people about you. When they ask how I ended up here, I tell them the truth. That I once knew a brilliant man building something revolutionary, and instead of supporting him, I mocked him and drove him away. I tell them, you're the best boss I've ever had, and that includes myself. I tell them, you taught me what real success looks like. It's not about money or status. It's about character. I appreciated that. Not because I needed his validation, but because it meant he'd finally learned the lesson I'd learned the hard way. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. It's determined by your work, your integrity, your refusal to quit when everyone says you should. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm the last one in the office, I think about that moment in Richard's driveway. The humiliation, the rage, the determination. And I realize that in some strange way, he did me a favor. His cruelty became my fuel. His doubt became my motivation. He tried to break me, and instead, he forged me into something stronger. I'm 38 now. I built a $14 million company from a laptop in an apartment, driven by people who said I'd never amount to anything. And when those same people came back, desperate and broken, I gave them something they never gave me, a chance. Not because they deserved it, but because I'm not them. I never was, and I never will be. That's what real success looks like. Not revenge, not bitterness, but the quiet confidence of knowing you proved everyone wrong, and the grace to lift others up even when they tried to tear you down. That's the empire I built, and no one can ever take that away from me.